Hi, welcome to In the Garden. I'm your host, Joyce Hochsprung. I'm a McLeod County Master Gardener, and today we're going to talk about propagating plants. Now, one thing to remember when you're propagating is watch to see if it's a patented plant. You're really not supposed to be propagating them. It's illegal. And you'll know that because the plant tag, when you bought the original, will say either PPF, plant patent applied for, or PPAF sometimes, or just PP, plant patent, and it might give the number of the patent. And if you want, you can look it up and see when it expires, but that's another story. So we're going to get started. We're going to talk about one of my, especially when I'm indoors in the winter or late summer, if I want to take cuttings of things that I want to overwinter to use the next year. One of the easiest ways I've found to do it is with stem cuttings, and it works for a lot of plants. Okay, here's a verbena that I just took a cutting from. And if I wanted to root that, I would strip off these lower leaves, because every place the leaves are, that's a growth node. So you want some of those nodes in a potting medium of some sort. Okay, so I know you probably can't see it on the camera, but trust me, there's a little bump on the stem, and where the leaves are is a growth node. So from those nodes, roots can grow. All right, so most of you have done it in water, and that's fine if it works for you. Some plants are so they'll propagate anywhere, water, any place you'd like. So a little windy out here today. We're trying to hang on to things. But one of the easiest ways is to make a forsyth pot. And there went that cutting. And I just take, this is an old, I don't know, mum or poinsettia pot or something. I like to use a piece of screen, old screen, cut and put in the bottom. Some people, you can use a coffee filter. In a pinch, you could even use a paper towel, but that will kind of rot out faster. So I like the screen. And we are just going to take vermiculite, which is basically, I believe, an expanded mica or silica or something. And let's see, we're going to try to wait for a wind to die down and get this down in here. I'm going to fill up the pot. And here again, you can use chopsticks again. I just happen to have this, and sometimes it's a good idea, and sometimes it doesn't stay on so well. So your choice. But what I would do is wet this thoroughly. Just get it sopping wet until water's running out. Then let it sit for a few minutes till it stops. One of the little clay pots works the best because they're porous. And you stop up the hole, or if you can find a small one that doesn't have a drainage hole, that works too. Stop up the hole with either like florist clay, or even in a pinch, foil, aluminum foil rolled up real tight and stuffed in there and smushed around it. It'll leak a little faster, but still not too bad. Okay, and you kind of screw that down into the middle of the pot. I don't know if you can. And remember, this is going to be nice and wet, okay? And then you take your cuttings. We'll grab this one off the ground again. And if you want, you can put it in rooting hormone. Plants that are a little harder to root may benefit from that. Some plants, if you're doing like coleus, as long as the weather is still warm outside, they'll root. You know, I've had them break off in a storm and land on the ground and root laying on the ground. So as long as the weather is warm and humid, they'll root just about anywhere. But then you stick it in, making sure that the nodes are covered. And remember your clear plastic, either garbage bag or a dry cleaning bag. Drape that over it or put it underneath and bring it to the top. This little thing, which comes on a lot of times poinsettias as a little support for them, can work. Or if you don't have one of these, the old chopsticks or dowels just stuck in to hold the plastic up off the plants and provide a nice humid environment will work. You make sure that little clay pot in the center is full of water. and it will slowly wick the water out because the clay is porous. So a plastic pot isn't going to do it. So you want the little clay ones, the little terracotta ones. Not, unglazed, not the glazed ones. And every few days you just check and see if you need to add a little water to your pot, and it just keeps a nice even moisture. There you go, I got water running out, see? And then I usually set this just in a tray like a plant that goes under plants, just a plastic tray. Or you could set it in something like this, whatever you have. Coffee filter lid, whatever works is fine. Now, some people, I have read that starting in plain vermiculite isn't great, that it can compact a little. So if you wanted, you could mix in a handful of the perlite. I wouldn't use perlite alone because that does not hold any moisture. It aids in drainage, but it doesn't actually hold moisture. So a tiny bit you could mix in there if you want. I've not had a problem with doing it this way, and I've done quite a number of them, but it's up to you. The perlite will add drainage. So if you're doing like a cactus mix or you're sticking succulents, you might want to add more perlite into your mix so it drains a little better and just keeps it lightly moist. And I've had people tell me, well, that's styrofoam. I don't want to use styrofoam. And I'm going, no, it's not styrofoam. It's expanded volcanic rock. It's pretty much as organic as you can get. So don't worry about adding a little perlite into things. And just what that does is add drainage. Vermiculite adds some drainage, but it also holds water. So depending on what cuttings you're doing, like I said, if I were doing succulents, I might add more perlite to that so it drains a little bit better, so it stays just lightly moist. Okay? Now suppose, and I don't have some of these plants, so I'm just going to have to talk to you about how to do it. And now suppose you wanted to do like a Dieffenbachia. Well, one way of doing that is air layering. And what you do is you make a slit, find a space on the stem, on a main stem. This works better on thick-stemmed plants like a Dieffenbachia, with a thick, sturdy cane. And you just make a little slit about an inch and a half long, kind of up into the stem. And then you take a toothpick and wedge it under the cut so it holds it open a little bit. And then the thing that works best is probably sphagnum moss. You might have to order it online. Maybe a nursery would have some they'd sell you. And I haven't actually done this. Like I said, I don't have any of those plants that I've wanted to propagate, but I've watched a few videos on it and read some stuff. And you open that, you soak your sphagnum moss till it's just saturated, then you squeeze it out so it's nice and moist but not dripping, and you wrap it around the stem. You want to completely cover the cut with the sphagnum moss. Then you take like saran wrap, and if you're having trouble, this sounds to me like it would be something that would be helpful to have an extra set of hands on, but I'm sure there's a way to do it without. But you wrap it up good, and you can tie it with string if you want, a piece of string around the middle or something, but then you take saran wrap and completely cover the sphagnum moss so none of it is sticking out, and wrap that around. And then you maybe every 4 or 5 days, maybe just unwrap it enough so that you can poke your finger in and make sure the sphagnum moss is still moist. If it's not, you can take a mist sprayer and just mist it to keep it moist and wrap it back up. And depending again on the plant, some take longer to root than others. About 2 weeks or so, you should start to see some roots forming. And when you have a good set of roots, you can just cut that part of the plant off and pot it up. So, and there again, since some of these are, if it's a tropical plant you're doing this to, you probably want to put your potted plant in like the plastic bag type thing, just to keep the humidity higher. You might have to vent it a little bit here, but you don't want it to cook, and you don't want it in direct sun, because that will cook it. but just, you know, it's kind of another way of doing it. Now suppose you just want to, you have maybe some shrubs. You got, gee, I'd like a couple more of these. Well, guess what? Some shrubs are really easy. You can take, and you almost have to look these up because different shrubs have different needs. And if I tried to go through all of them, I'd forget half, and you wouldn't remember, and I wouldn't remember, and we'd have a mess. So, but you can Google it and look it up. There are plant propagation books out there if you really want to get into it that'll guide you through a lot of these steps. But you want to go through that, and then some you can take tip cuttings of the softwood and the new growth in the spring, and you can do stem rooting like we just talked about in here. Some though want it to be semi-hardwood, they call it, which means it was this year's new growth, but you wait a little bit later in the summer until it's starting to firm up a little more and it's not quite so pliable. And some want hardwood or older wood cuttings, so you really need to know what shrub you're looking at doing. But some plants are very good at layering themselves, and that's another method. It's just like spirea, dogwood. If you just lay those down on the ground, take a stem that's, you know, maybe near the ground already, push it down, make a little wound, or scrape the leaves off one side so there's just a little wound on that node we talked about. Lay that down. If you need to, you can use like a sod staple to pin it down, mound a little soil over it. I've even heard of people saying, oh, I just threw a brick on top of it and held it down. It's a little bit slower method. It'll probably be the next summer before you have a rooted cutting that you can remove from the mother plant. But it works, and some of them will do that quite happily all by themselves. I have currants out and back that are proof of that I maybe was a little neglectful on pruning, and all of a sudden I had new shrubs coming up, and I'm like, whoa, I have a currant forest here. So some of them are very prone to doing that on their own, and if not, you can help them along a little bit. But again, your best bet is to look up the shrub you want to do, or if you just want to try it for fun, try it and see what happens. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's how you learn. So those are things to do. That's the layering. We've talked about the stem cuttings. Oh, root cuttings is another one. Some plants, like oriental poppies come to mind, do not like division. So it's either pretty much from seed or in a lab with cells growing on in a petri dish, or you can take root cuttings. When you take root cuttings, you dig down. You can either dig the entire plant up, but you might kill it. They're not real fond of being moved. But if you dig down alongside of it carefully and you find a few roots, it can probably spare a few of its roots. So you try to get as close to the mother plant as you can and cut a couple root cuttings. Maybe take 4 or 5, because some are probably not going to make it. That's kind of the deal with anything in plants. Some make it, some don't. So always do a couple spares. Take those, and you always want to you usually cut, well, it doesn't really matter, but as long as you do them all the same. But cut one side on the slant and one side straight across, so you know which is the top and which is the bottom when you go to pot them. I realized I only had a tray with holes, so I have this one underneath. And with the wind, I'm not going to fill it up, but again, you would fill it with, you could use sand if you want also, if you've got nice sand. But you could use a mixture of vermiculite and a little perlite, fill up the tray, and you just basically lay your cuttings on top of it, and then put another little layer of vermiculite over it. Make sure it's nicely watered. Put a humidity dome over it, or enclose it in a plastic bag and a few chopsticks or whatever, and just keep it lightly misted so it doesn't get, you don't want it to dry out, but you don't want it soggy wet. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention, and I want to make sure we cover, when you take your cuttings, now I washed all of these trays and the humidity dome and the pot and this, I gave them all a bleach bath. Because getting bacteria in there is one of the surest ways for you to not get happy plants. So your cutters, whatever you're using to take the cuttings, I like to use the Lysol ones, or you can use just rubbing alcohol as well. I wouldn't recommend Clorox because that's caustic and it will pit your pruners. So if you've got good pruners, you probably don't want that happening to them. But clean tools, clean everything clean. Have it nice and clean. Then you're just like with the seed starting, less chance of fungus getting in there and causing issues for you. So keep that in mind. Okay, that should be nice and clean. So, okay, then when I'd go and I'd take my cuttings from my plant, whether it's coleus or whatever, and like I said, I know a lot of people will root them in water and that works, but you'll get healthier, sturdier roots if you do them in something like this, or even a light sterile potting mix like a seed starting mix will work. You can just stick them directly, fill the pots and stick, like I said, coleus roots so easily at this time of year that it's, ridiculous that I've had them fall on the ground and root by themselves, and come to pick it up and go, oh, you're growing, okay. So don't worry too much about that. But again, and when you're taking cuttings in the fall for things you want to overwinter, you want to do it before the nighttime temperatures start dropping down into 50s, because when it starts dropping down to 50 or below, that's signaling the plant that, your time's over, or it's time to go dormant if it's an annual, perennial, or you're probably going to be saying sayonara, so don't waste energy on growing new roots. So they're easiest to take when the weather is still warm. In the spring, if you've got houseplants you want to propagate, again, it's easiest like starting in about March, because then the days are getting longer, more light, and that's signaling the plant that time to get growing. So you want to do that, think about that when you're taking your cuttings and your things. And again, the rooting hormone, you can get gel stuff, you can get powdered stuff. If you use the powder, there's usually like a 1, a 2, and a 3. A 1 is for easier to root cuttings like your coleus, things like that. And you dip it, always pour a little bit out of the container into an old bottle cap or small tray or something, just a little bit, because you don't want too much on it. And it's good to wet the cuttings first, the stem, and just kind of roll it back and forth in that powder, and then tap off the excess, because too much rooting hormone isn't good either. So just a little. And what you don't use, like I say, you only put a little bit into your container. You don't want to put that back into your original container of powder, because that can contaminate it. So always just take a little bit out. You can always add more if you need it. And this is a case where less is better. Okay, do that. And you can buy these like cups with a gel hormone in, with a foil top on, where you just poke a little hole in and stick the cuttings right in that if you want. And I found that for some of the things that are a little bit fussier about rooting, that works really well. It's just a very nice medium for them. But again, roots that are come out in those conditions are usually healthier, stronger roots. The water roots tend to be weaker. So when you transplant them, I'm not saying it won't work. For a lot of plants it does, but they'll be less likely to, it'll take them a little longer to get going. Now, if you don't care about that, that's fine. Now, what about a leaf cutting? And you're going, what's a leaf cutting? Well, I bet a lot of you, if you've grown African violets or Rex begonias, a leaf cutting, now with an African violet, you can just take the leaf. The petiole it's sometimes referred to as the stem, or the petiole, the part where it attaches it to the main body of the plant. Now you can either do it with the petiole on and stick it in a rooting medium, or you can take the petiole off and just stick the end of the leaf down in here and just watch, and eventually little baby plants will form around it. And you look at them and think, oh, is that ever going to be anything? But it will, just be patient. So you can do that. Rex begonias are one that come to mind that would be a good one for this tray method, because they they have a thick vein, so if you take and cut the vein on the underside, and unfortunately I just got some new Rex begonias and they're not big enough to steal leaves from yet, so I'm just going to have to tell you about it. But if you look at them, they have veins, and you take a sharp, like an X-Acto knife or something, and again, make sure it's clean, and just make a few little cuts across those main veins, and then lay it down in your container like this with your perlite or vermiculite. And if it doesn't want to lay flat, it's okay to put a little bit of the mixture over the edges of the leaf. But eventually, on each of those little cuts, it's going to send out little roots, and it's going to make little baby plantlets along those cuts. So that's a quick way to propagate your Rex begonias if you haven't tried it before. If you've grown them for a while, you've probably done this already, but if not, there you go. Now, we also talked about from seed, and I talked a little bit when we did the seed starting one about winter sowing. This is one of my winter sown jugs. Whoa. This is Meadow Blazing Star, Leotris ligulastylis, and I'm going to tip it a little here. You can see I have some nice little babies growing in here. The bigger ones are just about ready for me to poke them out, take like a pencil or a very, very thin trowel tip, or even a butter knife, and just poke it down in there, and I'll pop them out. And I'll probably pot them up a little bit and grow them on a while longer before I put them out. But these were pretty much no fuss through the seeds in here, and I don't know, I think it was late January or February maybe, and stuck them out in the snowbank and kind of kept my eye on them. And I think I started seeing a few tiny, teeny little green sprouts like late April, early May. So, and there's still a few more germinating in here, and I see maple seeds too. So, okay, so that's another method of plant propagation, is seeds. Now, whether you start them indoors or like a lot of things like zinnias are pretty easy to start outside. Mine are just coming up out in the garden. Hang on to this. So you can just plant in place. A lot of your vegetables are just as easy to plant in place, your carrots, your beans. In fact, some of those things really don't like transplanting. So seed starting, which could take us into seed saving, which might be another whole episode, who knows. But basically, you just save your seeds, dry them. You can put little like taffeta party bags over them, so the air and sun can get at them to finish drying, but you don't have to be there at the exact moment that they're ready to go. If you're saving seeds and you're saving them from a hybrid plant, the plant you get in the next generation that you plant is not going to be the same as the plant you saved the seed from. If when you're looking at seeds in the seed catalogs and it says OP, that means it's open pollinated, then you can save seeds from it. Now, I'm not saying you can't save the seeds from the hybrid, but just know they are not going to be the exact same thing. It might be similar, it might be completely different. I was just talking to my sister, who is also a master gardener, and somebody that she knows had saved seeds from a yellow petunia they got last year, and they gave her some seeds, so she thought, I'll try them, just see what happens. Well, she has purple petunias, so like I said, if it's a hybrid, it's probably gonna go back to one of the parents, or something, you might get something you like. It might be but it's fun to try it sometimes, but just be aware that it will not be the same. Okay, and we're gonna move over to something that needs a little dividing. I know it's gonna be hotter than Hades, but I don't care if I lose this, so it's not a biggie. Okay, we're going to talk a little about division. Now, prime time is spring, early spring, but lately we don't get spring anymore, so and some of these need to get out of here. As you can see, the gazebo is no longer here. All we have left is this really not so attractive concrete pad that we are working on, a plan for this, but we're not there yet. But some of this stuff needs to come out of here since it's shade plants, and I've got quite a bit taken out down on the other side already, but there's still more, surprisingly. It's amazing. So we're going to dig a little of the Solomon seal. This is the variegated form. Just shake. As you can see, we're getting quite dry here. I would cut off this old part and just cut right here. We'll see if I can, oh, it snapped right off. Because that's not going to send up new stems anymore. That's old. This is new stuff. It'll be healthy, new growth. And into a bucket of water it goes. And I probably should keep going and get all of this out of here so I can get busy on other things. But that's one way of, and these are super easy to divide. As you can see, you've seen me do daylilies, and we've done hostas, and you have a root mass there that is challenging, to say the least, on some of the bigger clumps. So depends on what you're dividing. But if you want it to be the exact same thing, then division is the way to go. If you don't care, you can save seeds from a lot of plants and see what you get. So, okay, I think to finish this up, we're just going to take a little quick tour around to see what's blooming. Early season things, the daffodils, the alliums have already finished, and we just have the seed heads left. But the baptisia is really going to town right now. I've had, these two have been here for probably 20 years. And one of my favorites, this is one you want to get up early to see. But I have a lot of flax in here. I started with one plant probably 30 years ago. And I pull out where I don't want them and let the rest go to town. The salvia is kind of a late May, early June bloomer. I don't even know what this one is anymore. It's been here for so long. Rose marble. And the thing I like about the salvias is when they're done with the first bloom, I'll cut them back hard and I'll get a reflush, sometimes 2 or 3 in a year. So, you can't beat that for a perennial. Most of them don't have a long bloom time. And this is a kind of a semi-perennial verbena called Annie. This is Coral Charm, and as you can see, this one just opened for the first time yesterday, the first bloom. And you can see already the heat and the wind are really doing a number on it, but it is what it is, and I'll enjoy it while it's here. Over here I think we have sheer ecstasy. And if Liz's camera can pick up the true color on these, I'll be amazed, because mine cannot. I've tried and I cannot get the actual color on these. And the same with this one. And I don't know what this one is. It might be Indian Chief, but I'm not positive. But it's a really deep, almost black on the falls. And this one is a newer one I've just had for a few years, called Rock Star. But we have this white one, which I think I've identified it as birch bark, looking at the iris, the historical iris register. And this one I'm pretty sure, this yellow one, I've ID'd as Bright Lights. The purple, I have absolutely no clue what that one is. But again, and the wind has really been hard on them. This one seems to stand up pretty well. This is, let me think. Well, anyway, that one, I love the color on that kind of grayed lavender. And the Amsonia, the blue star. That again, it's a little bit past prime, but still going. The Herman's Pride Lamiastrum is blooming now. It gives a nice silver tone here. Okay, with that, I think we don't have a lot in bloom yet, but we'll wrap up and we'll see you next time. If you're interested in having your gardens on a tour, let me know. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.